Welcome to 33 Founders, a series about founders of the coolest startups. Brought to you by 33 Voices and hosted by Chase Jennings and Jenna Abdu.
So Chris Cunningham, the co-founder and CEO of appssavvy. We are based here in New York in Soho. We started 6 years ago on the heels of Facebook opened up its platform to developers. So appssavvy was the first company that started to work with developers to help them better introduce brand advertising into their communities, into their social games. Fundamentally, we believe that traditional display advertising online is very ineffective and intrusive to the user. So arguably, we've been probably the pioneers in trying to solve that by putting a greater emphasis on timing, context, user experience, and the way that we established appssavvy when we started was a rep business where we would find inventory, represent it, share revenue that our sales team would sell into Fortune 100 companies. So we would do things into mom Facebook applications as far as Zynga, Farmville, where we would bring McDonald's integrate into Farmville for one day. After 3 years of tremendous growth, we didn't have an IP or ad platform, so we pivoted the business to become more of a technology company with an ad stack versus service. So today, same mission, same customers. It really now comes off the heels of people's behavior has shifted from passive content consumption to what we call activities. We share, we comment, we pin, we check in. However, technology, as I mentioned, has not caught up with that trend. We still put ads adjacent to what we do. So our platform solves that by giving a publisher, from Disney to AOL to New York Times to social gaming company, the ability to create inventory based on native activities within natural breaks of the user experience. So we're trying to find mid and post moments that are more conducive to the user experience. And we're doing that for both web and mobile today.
Perfect. And you touched on this a little bit before, Chris, when you talked about timing and context. Since the conception of digital advertising, those two things have really been missing. How do you make sure that that's very relevant in everything that you do at appssavvy?
So it's a good question. So it starts with the fact that we are a publisher platform. So when we talk to developers, unlike probably 99% of the conversations that they're in, we ask them, what do people do? Which is always sort of a question they're not used to because they're used to getting asked how many pages or ComScore or how many uniques. And those are metrics, quite frankly, we don't really care about. So we ask them, what do people do? And then we ask them what lends itself to a natural break in that particular community, game, app, website. So that publisher is dictating timing and sequence. Our technology is then integrated web through an API and for mobile and SDK, so we can actually see the behavior before a specific ad is being called. So a lot of it's just being out of the gate from an integration standpoint. It's working closely with publisher to identify those moments, those natural breaks that lend themselves to advertising. And then, of course, the result of going a little bit of extra work from the integration standpoint means higher response and effectiveness for advertising. So I'm sure you guys have already concluded that the response or click-through rate or view or whatever of our platform is sometimes 3 to 5x above industry standard. And we're doing that with pretty large, beautiful ads. So that's how we do it.
Awesome. So one trend that I've heard that you're pretty excited about, and as you kind of touched on, is that marketers are starting to understand social is about people, not content. So what's the best way for a company producing lots of content, sort of like us or someone looking to politely join the conversation?
So from an advertising perspective, and we're seeing this with sort of this gold rush, this bum rush of native right now. There's two sides of the coin. There's kind of the, how do I make sense of my content from an editorial standpoint? And that's, BuzzFeed is doing that as an owned and operated. Companies like ShareThrough are representing other publishers to, if you have content, to actually make it advertising worthy. For us, we don't touch the content side. Ours is pure display, triggered based on a native event. But sort of, from a publisher perspective, the idea is to create inventory that is natural or native to what people do. And it's not forcing anything artificially, as I mentioned before, adjacent or around, or even though even what I think Facebook does somewhat ineffectively is, right rail small boxes. We all know the challenges with traditional display, with performance and viewability, and that's predominantly driven by the fact that we're not taking the user flow into consideration. So for publishers, we always recommend just consider why people go to your site and what their behavior is, and focus on that as the first criteria, and then think about advertising second, as far as, opening up inventory.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a couple times today native advertising. And I think that a lot of times that definition gets a little bit confused. And so it makes people stray away from it when they don't need to. What is the best way, and maybe the simplest way, for other entrepreneurs that you can define how native advertising is a really positive thing for their business?
So, I mean, we started reaching out to Foursquare and Tumblr and BuzzFeed and all these guys about 18 months ago. And we said, there's kind of a change in ad tech. You're either going to be a massive player or you're going to be programmatic. And if you're not, and I'm fine with programmatic, it makes sort of efficiency of sort of, average display banners. But if you're not in those two buckets and you're trying to do things that are more conducive to the user, there's a category of native that's being created. And essentially, the one thing that I know a lot of those companies would all, including Twitter, would all agree with is that the user comes first, timing matters, context matters, and it's generally not going to be a standard kind of box that we're used to seeing. So the good news is that in order for that to really make sense at scale, is you need a lot of players that are actually doing it, and we're finally at that stage. So unlike 12 months ago, advertisers are asking about it. It's in their request for proposals. Large media companies like New York Times are kind of reinventing themselves and introducing native ad products. So there's no doubt, if you don't follow this, then you're probably not as close as you should be. But there's a massive trend happening in our industry as we speak, which is finally, and it's positive, finally, thanks to Facebook and Twitter and Pandora, and I think, what maybe an appssavvy is doing at a smaller scale, representing other publishers, there's finally a greater appetite to consider the user first. And Yahoo's calling that out in their press and their moves. Google's now calling that out. So that's good. That's the first time in 20 years that user and publisher are becoming front and center in the conversation versus what the advertiser wants.
Now, a lot of people are talking about sponsored content being the next big thing in publishing. Do you agree with that?
I think it has a role, and I think I think it will make sense to some. But yeah, it's not going to be as big as video, which is kind of $3.5–4 billion spend, but it's going to be prominent and big. And if you have traditional content, I'd rather see a publisher leverage their content in a editorial, creative way versus put in ads. Generally, my stance is simple. I don't believe in putting ads adjacent to what people are doing. I just fundamentally don't believe in that, haven't for 6 years. So anything that is leveraging the behavior of the consumer, whether it's through an editorial or display, i.e. appssavvy, I'm all for it.
We're all for it too.
Yeah.
Is there one ad in particular that you've done that you're most proud of?
I think rather than one specific ad or brand, I would just use an example of how we're delivering ads in real time based on what people do. So Coca-Cola has an open happiness campaign they run every year. It's kind of their big tentpole campaign. We're running on both web and mobile in December. Again, the messaging is open happiness. So out of the hundreds of activities that we represent in our data set, we said, well, what if since open happiness is about, giving happiness, why don't we only target their creative to activities that are best aligned? So sending a gift, sharing, So then we slightly changed the creative to the Coca-Cola Open Happiness campaign to after you shared, the creative would say, aha, you're the giver of happiness. So that's kind of for us the nirvana of advertising, because it's taking a behavior of a native activity and at that moment delivering an ad that speaks to what you just did. And as you can imagine, that sort of like went 3 to 5x as far as more people interacting with that ad. So that's probably a good case study of what we think all advertising should look like. Most ad networks, essentially, they cookie you and then they retarget you. And that's when, no matter where you go, whether, after this call, you log out and you see an ad, tomorrow, you're kind of like, well, why am I, yes, I'm interested, but you're getting me at the wrong time. For us, we think that's the missing piece that we're excited about solving, which is when and why, and taking consideration what the user's doing. So I think that Coke example kind of summarizes overall what we think advertising should be.
So do you want all advertisers to adopt this ideology? Do you think it would get too crammed? Would your approach be uncool then?
No, I mean, I think the challenge is that the industry is kind of messed up and agencies buy a certain way and billions of dollars flow. So think about an ocean current. As you guys are in San Diego, it's like you're not going to swim against an ocean current. You're just not. So even though intuitively what we do and what we say makes sense, and most people don't really dispute that, it's not the way the industry buys today. So we need to be somewhat patient, but also kind of hope for the rising tide that I mentioned before, other companies to kind of break the somewhat lazy, non-interesting way that we buy inventory today. But that's a pretty seismic shift and change to get people to think about it. And then how do you scale it, et cetera. So good progress, more work to do.
I think you guys are doing a great job so far. And
Thanks.
It's clear that, Chris, you have that sort of intuition of how to reach people and the best time to reach them. You were named by Business Insider one of the most important people in mobile advertising for multiple years, and I'm sure this year as well. How do you personally get into a state of flow? What questions do you ask yourself about how to create the best ad?
It's a good question. I honestly, I think for me, it's just, you have to be, everyone, whether you're an athlete or a musician or you have to just principally study your trade and what you do. So my inspiration, where we kind of, I think, between apps, being ahead of the app curve, being ahead of the social curve, and being ahead of the native curve, I think a big reason why appssavvy, and sometimes being ahead of market's not a good thing for any other founders that will watch this, because dollars take time to flow. But spending time with your audience. I mean, a lot of it is just like, to answer your question, it's you spend time with publishers, you spend time with developers, you talk to your customer base, and you begin to identify what their challenges are, and that's what sort of leads to innovation and ideas of making mobile advertising more effective. For example, the Business Insider thing that you referenced. And I think a lot of that, or maybe that recognition, is just attributed to, a lot of publishers, quite frankly, don't have the courage to say that they care about the user experience, because that means they may alienate themselves from dollars. And, I'd be full of shit if I didn't say that it doesn't have a positive impact on how much revenue flows through our business. We do well. But could we do 10x better if we said that we work on behalf of advertisers? Probably, but we're kind of staying the course because we believe that 2014 and 15, we believe the trend is only going to come more in favor for user, and we sense it, we can feel it around us. So we're kind of holding our stance, and I think you're not going to get recognition by saying that you're doing the exact same thing as 99.9% of the industry, and appssavvy does not fall into the 99%.
Not at all. So beyond all of the success, you've also got quite a sense of humor, I'd say. Like I saw this video where you're roaming the streets, engaging with random people.
Harassing people.
Yeah, I love it. But what was that all about for anyone who hasn't seen it?
You know, it's really just to keep light and sort of, you know, not take advertising technology that seriously. We come up with all these ridiculous terms and acronyms and out of the box and viral and
Utility.
you know, and utility. And I just decided to including myself. So essentially, it was making fun of myself too, which is easy to do. So I said, you know, let's go out in the street and kind of bring these acronyms and these terms that we like to take ourselves pretty seriously on, and kind of drop it on people and see what their response was. And yeah, it's always well received.
So more importantly, then, is having fun kind of a big part of your company culture?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, it needs to be. Needs to be. That starts with Michael and I, the other co-founder, and then the what happens is leaders in the company pick up on that, and then they follow. You know, they ensure that culture is what we want it to be, but it doesn't. You know, you can't force it. It comes pretty naturally.
Okay, so looking into other cultures, who do you admire most in advertising?
Individuals or companies?
Let's say companies.
I think Twitter, how quickly they have, most technology companies take quite a bit of time to put a stake out and say they're going to take advertising seriously. But I think those guys have done an amazing job very quickly, kind of going from zero to like $1 billion in revenue in 5-6 years. So I like how they think about it. I love how their ads are non-traditional, triggered based on activity, promoted tweets, etc. So they'd be my number one. I think maybe Throwless from an e-commerce perspective. So those are two that I like a lot.
We've talked a lot about advertising and everything that you guys are doing, and one of the councils you're on is YEC, somewhere that we would love and be privileged to be a part of. Since you're lucky enough to know what goes on there, can you give us a glimpse of that environment and how they've helped you?
Sure. They just, you know, I think in a lot of cases, not being overly organized is a positive thing. So whether it's through their newsletters or through Facebook, they're constantly opening up opportunities for entrepreneurs to meet each other, to learn about fundraising, to get together in New York, meetups, understanding how to recruit. So they're very active. They're very always on, but they really feel like a body, not, you know, sort of representing all. And there's, depending on where you sit with your business, there's probably something for everybody, meaning I may not see the value in everything that they send me, but there may be something occasionally where I'm like, oh, you know what, that's a value. I'm going to pick up on that. So they're you know, I probably get 3 newsletters a week. They're hosting things. They're active on Facebook. And, you know, I mean, but they feel it feels very legitimate. You know, they do things at the White House and things like that. So it definitely feels like a legitimate, well-run organization. And I think that credibility is important.
Yeah, we're just curious because we've been speaking with lots of founders who are part of YEC, and we were just starting to think that maybe it's like a startup Illuminati or something.
They're a good group. They're run by good people.
Cool. So you also have a relationship with the New York Times through True Ventures. It really must be nice to have some of them as part of your board of advisors. So what are some of the great benefits of working with them?
You know, we're still a young company and we're still figuring things out. We don't have all the answers. So anytime that you can bring people that are smarter than you into a room and bring many people that are smarter than you into a room and give them the platform to be brutally honest with you, because while you're running a company, it's one of the hardest things to do on earth. So you don't need people to be your friend necessarily. You have your personal friends when you go home. You need people to tell you what you're doing wrong, what they think. And I think, you know, more traditional companies like the Times and AOL, who both are close to appssavvy bring that level of experience to our board conversations and things like that.
When you get feedback, and sometimes it's about how you can change, or how you can improve, how do you deal with making that shift?
Depends if I like their criticism or not. I think younger entrepreneurs probably have more as to they got everything figured out, and then at some cases you'll be humbled pretty quickly because everyone will. No one has just perfect trajectory their entire. That's BS. So you know what? You have to you got to be open. You don't have to respond to everything, every level of feedback you get, but you should be willing to listen. Or I think that shows signs of insecurity and kind of weakness. I mean, even the best entrepreneurs today are happy to admit that they don't have all the answers. No one does. So.
So let's look into the future really quick. Where do you see appssavvy in the next 5 years? Are you going to be on Google Glass or Pebble watches?
So I'd like to think that here's what I'd like to have happen. I'd like for our company to get the credit that it deserves for being kind of the grizzly vet in the room that's been an icebreaker for many publishers to make advertising more effective, and our mission, rethink the delivery and reception of advertising, and that we can see signs of it in large publishers, mid-sized publishers, maybe from a SaaS component. So, less about kind of exit or return, but we'd like to see kind of our legacy kind of live on. So whether that's 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years, that's what I'd like to see.